Hello everybody, my name is Alckemy. Happy holidays. Today I'm excited to bring you some really cool stuff. We're going to be doing some bass design from scratch within Bitwig, and I'm going to be walking you through some of the features that kind of make it unique and also just have some fun because I haven't done Neuro bass in Bitwig in a really long time. I've got two examples for you, and then we're going to be doing some stuff from scratch, and I want to talk about some of the intricacies, sorry, and stuff that will help you kind of make these decisions when you're doing things. One thing that I will say is if you hear voices in the background, my partner Corey has some friends over, and so I apologize. But this is the only time that I have to record before I leave for Arkansas to visit my grandmother who had a triple bypass surgery recently, so I will not be here next week. That being said, here is example one, which is this sound. And then here's example two. Cool. So if that seems interesting, let's go ahead and jump in and get started with some bass design. And we are going to open up with Polymer. Now, the cool thing about this is that you don't actually need a lot of processing in order to get something interesting. I think that this time we're going to go with the bandpass route, but you can easily transition this into different kinds of filters and stuff that will give you different results. And I think that it's important to open up with that because let's just kind of go through some stuff that is going to matter to you. So first and foremost, if we're going to create a Reese, there are a lot of options that we have. For example, if we start with a wavetable, we can open this up and choose between 3, 5, 7, 16, and also 3 different choices of fat, focused, and complex. So if we were to listen to this, let me turn the spread down. And also let me go into this and make this into a saw wave. Forgive me, we're in the beta, and so sometimes it doesn't show what it's supposed to. So now, something that's interesting about this that is really actually kind of cool and kind of important to consider is that you can actually modulate how many voices you transition in between. And I don't think that you can do that with yeah, I can't think of another synth that you can modulate that with, which is kind of nice. So one thing that you could do, which we're not going to stick with this plan, but just as a, hey, here's a free bonus, is if you change this to note, you change this to hold, and you switch this to go up, you're not going to be able to see it because of the beta, but this will actually rotate in between 3, 5, 7. So now I can't necessarily tell a huge difference behind those other than the two extremes, which one of them sounds like it's like super tearing and the other one sounds like it's just kind of detuned. But still, that's a pretty cool thing that you can keep in mind if you're wanting to do something like that. Now, the other thing that I prefer is to use the voice stacking because this actually makes your sound not only louder, but it just, yeah, it's very powerful. When you stack these two voices, it's kind of traditional with maybe an analog synth or something of the sort, but what happens when you stack amplitude is it essentially doubles the amplitude of the sound. So especially if they're in phase with each other. So if we take a look at what's going on here, and sorry for the science, I know that you probably just want to see the end result, but this is stuff that's important if you're wanting to learn bass design, is check this out. So that's at 7.5, but if we take this and we take this down to 1, it's noticeably more quiet. If you really want to take a fat sound and you want to like overdo this, no pun intended, then something that you can do to make this just absolutely insane is to just stack this times 16. And what are you going to get? Boom. There you go. There's your, well, yeah, that's like what, lots of different basses, long story short. So anyways, we're going to be okay with just 2. And we'll take this little guy right here and split this up to say like 20 something-ish. And that should give us plenty of movement to work with, which will sound like this. And then another thing that I'm going to do is add a macro And this is going to sound redundant, but I like to do this to the pitch because messing with the pitch knob itself is kind of finicky. And what we can do with this is just set that to a 24 to where it can go up and down. So. Okay, tutorial's over, right? No, but that's actually a classic sound that, is immediately usable just from having two effects, which is the over for protection or for clipping purposes. I guess if you have a limiter, you don't even need that, but yeah. So now that we have our sound, the next thing that I want to talk about is the relationship behind how you filter. So if we were to do a notch filter that's very steep per se, one thing that you'll notice is that if we start to sweep the higher wow, I can't talk, I'm sorry. If we start to sweep the higher regions, then it's going to sound a lot more squelchy, a lot more nasally. Let's go ahead and drive this so that way it's a little bit more dramatic. Okay, if you drive this too hard, then there is no drama. And something else that we might want to try is using this notch instead. So if we use a bandpass, you might be like, dude, why would we do that? We're going to take out the low end, right? Not necessarily. We're going to have to bring it back. But if we stick to the low mids here, then we're going to get things that are a little bit more of a low vowel. So if you want to find something in between, then you can always do a complex filter, which we will get into. But for now, yeah, I mean, if you just want a standard. You see how even with the low pass, though, it's like not quite as dramatic of that vowel. And if you were to use a high pass, then you get something like that. So, yeah. Anyways, I think that it's important to kind of just understand how all that stuff sounds, because when we start to get into the movement piece of this, we're going to want to be aware of what we're trying to manipulate. And so what I'll do next is just create some movement here. Sounds good to me. And we can apply this to this. We're going to set this into bipolar mode because I want this to make sure that it dips down back into the low end. So we'll go like this, and then we'll see where that ends up. And you'll notice that I'm not going too high, because if we do, then it gets into really high resonant territory, and that's very not good for your ears. That being said, we can drive this a little bit if we want to via this. But I think that this is an excellent starting point to get into our other stuff. So first things first, let's go ahead and grab an EQ8. What we're going to do is we are going to create a vowel. And if you've ever seen me pull up pink trombone, then you'll kind of already be familiar with what I'm getting ready to describe. But basically, through these dips and resonances, we can actually create a vowel that will sound like some kind of wow or something like that. Now, typically speaking, I use a lot of these in something like faceplant and multipass and the such, but I think that it's probably going to be more efficient to just manipulate this as a whole, and there's nothing wrong with that. So take a listen. So what we can do is grab a segments and kind of create a similar shape. We can use random if we want to, but I want to create something that's a little bit more repeatable, a little bit more predictable. And so with that, we're kind of just going to keep it like this, I think. And we'll adjust this here to like 20 something. Now, one element that you could do in order to keep this, or to make this random, is you can mess with this here, as you can see, which I'm going to want to back off of that. But what I've done is I got to move this over here, is just adjusted the gain of each of these. So that way, even though they're in the same placement, the relationship of them is either going to be more dramatic or less dramatic. So I don't know if this is even going to sound cool. I just wanted to be like, hey, because that way all of these are moving together, and then you use one random to kind of mess with the peaks and stuff. And as you can see, I'm actually trying to be more subtle with this than anything else, because the EQ plus is super dramatic if you have the range set to plus 30. So like the smallest bump, this is plus 10 dB. So the smallest bump and the smallest change that you make to this is going to be extremely dramatic. And so when you're working with this, it might even make more sense to do something kind of like this, because or maybe a middle ground in between, because this is going to be a little bit more forgiving when you start to do those resonances and whatnot. Because if we just blow this up like this, like at 100%, then it's not going to, you're going to have what's called intermodular distortion, and the low end is going to overtake all of the high end content that you have and just sound like muffle, which does have its use, but that's not always the case of what you want to do. So but as you can hear now, we've got a little bit of movement, which is nice. And so from here on, we will kind of just complete this with maybe doing some movement with a notch. Because sometimes if you have some crazy peaks and stuff and you do create a notch, then you can get some interesting interactions. And I will say that you're going to see me use a lot of segments here, but you can always just group this, everything in here, and just use one segment to control everything. Which, why don't I just show you that, because as opposed to talking about it, I should probably be about it, right? What we will do is just grab this. We'll leave this one here since we've already done the modulation, but we can just attach this now to the inside, which is great, of this guy. So now we don't have to do crazy routing and all that, and that's part of why I love Bitwig so much. Even though this workflow of like scrolling and stuff isn't the most efficient, it's nice that it's just, yeah, I don't have to make a macro and then map it to the macro and then do the modulation to the mac. Yeah, none of that. It's just there, which is nice. So let's adjust this just a bit. And then maybe what I'll do is adjust the range. There we go. And then if you're curious how I did that, I just went right click and then clicked on this in order to bring the modulation back up. So it's a little bit more forgiving in that way when you need to adjust something. Now, a key player in this is a filter that is a low pass, because this relationship with everything else is going to open and close, say, a mouth, or, you know, something of the sort with that. And because of that, you want to kind of have stuff that creates those interactions, and that's what the coolest thing about Neurobase is creating these weird interactions with these dips and resonances in order to make something sound like it's talking. At least that's my expression of it, or that's how I would break it down. You're going to notice that I turned the distortion off on this, and that's because I'm going to add another filter to bring it back. And I want to do post filter distortion because we're taking so much away. I want to bring it back after we remove stuff. I don't want to add a bunch of stuff and then take it away. You're going to find that there's a relationship with that. You kind of just have to feel it out. But yeah, what can you say? There we go. I just added a little bit of noise, and then now what we can do is just play around with the pitching and see what we can get out of that. So take a listen. Cool. So it sounds muffled, which, you know, sometimes that's part of the game, but it does at least sound like we're on the right track. And this is going to be the colorization part of this segment now. This is how you get the movement. And then what we can do is maybe grab a frequency splitter or something in order to get texture and stuff, make it sound more interesting. So I'm going to go for 2 effects on the middle band. The first one is going to be a phaser, and the second one is going to be a comb filter. because immediately what this is going to do is make the mids more interesting. So if we take this and we just listen to it, yeah, it's pretty sick. Now, some cool things that we can do with this is that we can actually use the phaser to mess with the frequency range. And so the center frequency is the color here. And so we can just use the same MSEG or whatever to segments to control that. And this is basically just another comb filter that's much softer. Comb filter, phaser, flanger are all cousins of each other, even though they're not quite the same thing. But what this will do is just add more of that emphasis to the talking thing. And then with this is just an LFO, but what it's doing is actually creating the flanging effect. So if we turn this off and just focus on this, take a listen. Which is pretty nice. So so on the high end, if we want to, we can either A, try to distort the high end. We can also grab an EQ and pull up the high end like this, which should be pretty dramatic. It's kind of up to you. I think that I like the distortion better, to be honest. And at a glance, if you kind of just leave everything where it is after this point, then you're kind of good to go. We do want to try to adjust some of this stuff though, as the interaction behind everything is really where the magic is. It's not just like apply this effect, this effect, this effect, and it works. It's about how you make them move with each other to create that kind of stuff that will really give you those satisfying tonalities and the satisfying, like, I don't know, monster sounds or whatever. And keep in mind too that this is just a general synopsis about how this stuff works. Like, we're not even talking about vocoders and a bunch of other crazy tricks and resampling and stuff. This is just to get you started. So take it for what you will. With that though, I think that I do want to keep this relatively simple. And so the last thing that we'll probably talk about is the compression stuff. But I mean, if we take a listen to this. You know, maybe we back off of this and start to change those other expressions that we talked about from before, where maybe we turn this on and see how this sounds with different, you know, motions and stuff. Yeah, you've got lots of different flavors, which are super cool. And I think that that's really fun because not only do you have different flavors, but you can also change the different, you know, oscillators here without messing with the patch. You can also make some changes here with the diffuse, original, and aligned, or remove the fundamental. I don't remember if I brought that up or not, but yeah, so if you want to have this be the movement and have this be clean, so you can do that too if you want. The thing with it though is that when you're trying to create the pulsing, a lot of times it's not good to have the sub because you're really trying to pit these two oscillators against each other to create the beating as much as possible. When I say beating, it's the boom, 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 right? So, you know, if I were to close this and turn all of this off, it's that really nice. That. And when you kind of characterize stuff off of that, then the rest of the processing becomes a lot easier to work with, because whatever movement you create is going to complement it. But because this is still in MIDI, then you can go back and, you know, change some of this stuff. Right? So that's pretty cool. Now, with that, the only other thing that I would say is you can take this one step further. If you right click this and change it into a polygrid, then that will open up some other options for you for like FM and stuff. And that can be advantageous because you can do phase modulation, not to be confused with FM, and something like this instead, and start to introduce other sounds or other timbres when you activate this mod here. So which can sometimes be pretty cool. The other thing that we need to talk about with this is that I don't really have an elegant solution for OTT, for first party effects. Yes, I have tried OTT from Dynamics. I've tried it through the Compressor Plus with the FX3 and all that other stuff, but I just can't quite get it right. So if you have this, this would be my recommendation because this just makes everything sound better. You can also use, yeah, I talked about this, but you can also boost the high end and stuff or whatever. There's also the free OTT. There is also like, if this is like your only option for whatever reason, what you can try is using a Dynamics on another FX3 here. And the thing with upwards and downwards compression, which is what OTT does, sorry, wrong one, is that this here is not a frequency spectrum. This over on the left is the quiet parts of your signal. This in the middle is your threshold, and this in the top end is the loud parts of your signal. So if, let's say, you don't have a lot of highs, your highs are quiet, which they are, then what you can do is move the low threshold up, change the ratio here, and try to pull up those quiet parts of the sound. If you have loud parts of the sound and you want to do expansion, then you can also do that as well by pulling off of this and turning the ratio down and pumping this here. And so the trick to it is to try to find a nice middle ground with this, but you have to be careful. But even still, the way that it sounds is just a little bit too dirty for me for when I'm trying to make something sound pristine. Forgive me. This is pulling up that quiet part of the sound. As you can see, the filters all have a noise floor, and that's just part of their anatomy of how they were built, for better or worse. But anyways, if we play this now. Yeah, then there's other things that you can do to make it sound kind of cool or whatever. But I don't know, I would just go for the OTT. That's the one thing that I think is still missing from Bitwig. Even though they just put out a Compressor Plus, please don't try to flame my comment section because of that. But yeah, this is a starting point. And if you look at how I do this in multipass or, you know, any other kind of like super rack-esque thing, you'll notice that the process is very similar, except multipass might have, you know, more of these, more slice EQs and all that. And once you understand like applying one, then try another, you know? So there's one here. There's one here. Look at that. You'll notice that there's a bandpass there that has a mix that comes in every once in a while. Distortion, filtering, delay and chorus, convolution reverb, you know, This is just clipping, but it's all kind of the same. And so when we kind of pit that up against each other, you know, different filter perhaps. Try this one. Similar setup. This one's a little bit more stomp boxy because of the fat trader, but you know. This one doesn't have any modulation built into it, so we'll try this one instead. Kind of same deal though, hey? So yeah, very, very similar way of how I do all this stuff. So in any case, yeah, that's pretty much all I got. If you like these sounds, I've got a bunch of stuff available on alchemy.com, both for Bitwig, Ableton, Faceplant, Current, sample packs, all that kind of stuff. And if this was helpful to you, then please leave a comment and, you know, tell me about your experience, or, you know, if you got your own tricks that you like to do. I didn't cover everything. We didn't talk about vocoders and frequency shifters and all that other stuff, but this should be a guide to help point you in the right direction, not to teach you how to create a specific sound. In any case, thanks guys. I appreciate your time, and I will see you back on Monday the 19th, 15th. I don't know, whenever that next Monday is. Bye everybody. Have a great rest of your evening.